And all join palms and repeat after me. I take refuge in the Buddha.
I take refuge in the Buddha.
I take refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
Keeping the palms joined. Palms down. All right, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Thanks for showing up. Thanks for being here. You know, it's interesting because everybody you encounter, everyone, already this morning, everybody you've encountered at home, wherever you were, at work, on your way here, maybe in traffic, maybe fighting to get your favorite spot for your shoes on the shoe rack or your favorite seat in here. Everyone that you encounter on that way is struggling with something. All of them. They're all having a difficult time with life. And if you can remind yourself of that, then the way we interact with people, the way we interact with ourselves will drastically change that situation. People have enough difficulty without you making it worse. We have enough difficulty without other people making it worse. Now, as we know, many of us spent years trying to control what other people do, and that doesn't work so well. But what we do have control over is what we do. And as you go about your days, just remember that every person you encounter is dealing with some sort of struggle, some sort of challenge, some sort of difficulty. No matter what you see, no matter how, big their smile is and how kind they are to you and how they say hello and hug you and all that kind of stuff. Any of you ever put on a facade to pretend you're okay? But inside, you're just like shattered and broken and destroyed. So is everybody else. Some more so than others. And I'm not introducing this for those who might be brand new or, never heard me talk about this stuff before. I'm not introducing this to suggest that we're all just miserable people. Maybe we are a lot of the times, but we have a lot going on. And this practice is beginning to understand that it's not always about you. It's about everybody else. And the more we can really understand that everybody is going through their own challenge and their own difficulty, the kinder we will be towards others. The gentler we will be towards others. And if we can bring more of a kind, gentler, nicer approach to people, then we can make their life a little bit better. If nothing else, we won't make their lives worse. And I think at the very least, we owe that to ourselves and to others. So it might be an odd way to look at it, but try to remind yourself, I'm going to do whatever I can to not make somebody else's life worse. Sometimes that helps. So, and if you have difficulty kind of understanding that or connecting with what other people are actually going through, just take a moment once in a while to reflect on what you're going through inside, mentally, emotionally, and know that you're having a difficult time. And what you really need is others to be kinder and nicer to you. So, so with that, we'll start with the meditation practice. To those who are joining virtually, good morning to you as well. Thank you for showing up. As you see, there's a chat box on your screen somewhere, so feel free to say hello and introduce yourself there. A couple things I'll tell you before we begin, especially for those who might be sitting for the first time. Nothing's going to happen to you. Okay, not going to float away. You're not going to have any mystical, magical experiences. The mind that races all day long is not going to shut off. Right? Don't judge your practice. Meaning, don't ask yourself, is this working or not working? Are you doing it right? Are you doing it wrong? We're just going to sit. We're going to breathe. You'll hear sounds inside, sounds outside. This is life. Right? Life is filled with chaos. And this practice is learning to get quiet and still within all of the chaos. Posture, you just want to be comfortable. If you're on a cushion, often it helps slide to the front third, pushing the stomach forward. Allows the back to straighten. If you're on a chair, bench, however you're seated, just trying to sit up straight if comfortable, relaxing the shoulders. Hands can be on the knees or lap. If you need to move, simply move. Movement doesn't make you a bad meditator. It just means you need to move. So simply move and then return to stillness. I will guide us as we begin, and we'll settle into a little bit of silence. Starting with your eyes closed if comfortable, or slightly open. Mouth is open or closed. We'll start with taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. And eventually, settle into a natural rhythm of the breath. Noticing the mind as it wanders, jumping from thought to thought. Start with gently guiding the attention, focus to the stomach or chest. Breathing in, feel them rise. Breathing out, they fall. Simply continue this practice, observing sensation of breath. As the mind wanders, lost in thought, recognize it. Release that thought. Return attention, focus to the breath. Breathing in, follow breath in. Breathing out, follow breath out. letting go of expectations, letting go of judgments from the practice, just sitting, breathing. Learning to be comfortable in stillness, in quiet, wanting nothing but to sit and breathe. And with the body still, rested, and the speech quiet, aware of all sounds, and the mind learning to settle, know what it's like to just sit and breathe. Knowing with each breath, there's nothing else to do. Nowhere else to go. And no one else to be. Everything beautiful, exactly as it is. Sitting, breathing. Once again, taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. As you slowly open the eyes, slowly beginning to move. And most important, with the practice of meditation, is to recognize how you feel now, immediately after, compare this to how you typically feel throughout your day. Recognize the difference, if there is one. Ask yourselves how you prefer to feel every day for the rest of your life. And realize however you feel now, if it's quiet, calm and still, or a busy mind, racing mind, whatever you're sitting with at this moment, has nothing to do with anything I said. It's nothing to do with how we sit and hold the hands across the legs. It's nothing to do with the sounds around us or anything else for that matter. It's everything to do with your own mind and your own mind's reaction to an external condition. This is what the Buddha called pratitya samuppada, means dependent origination. This is the basis of the Buddha's awakening. The word Buddha simply means awakened. He was a human being, no different than any one of us, who began to understand why he suffered, why he got angry, sad, depressed, stressed, anxious. He began to understand the causal relationship of all phenomena. What that means, very simply, for all of us, regardless of where you come from or where you think you're going, your whole life is filled with things that happen. You react. More stuff happens, more reactions. This is what we get. This practice is simply learning what it's like to respond to something quietly, peacefully, still. Because for most of us, the way you responded to the last 20 minutes is quite different from how you respond to everything else that's happening throughout your day. And so all we're working on is closing the gap to where the way you feel now is closer to how you feel always. Just as driven, motivated, productive, successful, whatever that means to you in your respective lives. But with a mind that's steady, clear, focused, distracted by nothing, disturbed by no one. This practice is not easy. It's not necessarily fun. It's not an escape, as often people think it is. It's direct perception into the present moment. And that present moment is filled with tremendous conflict, difficulty, chaos. And so this practice is learning to be with life as it arises, not trying to escape from things, which is where we spend so much of our time. Meditation is free. Buddhist practice is free. It's just sitting, breathing, learning to be kind to yourself and everybody else around you. Once we stop trying to change, fix, control, manipulate everything else and everyone else, when we work on changing our mind and our reaction to the world around us, life gets simpler. But it takes time. And so we learn to be patient with ourselves, patient with others, kind to ourselves, kind to others, as I spoke about at the beginning, because that at least gives us a chance. If we're not kind to ourselves and we're not kind to others, then there's no point in any of this. Cultivating a meditation practice, if you can't practice kindness toward yourself and others, won't do you any good. An old friend of mine used to say, an angry person who meditates is just an angry meditator, right? Meditation isn't going to just magically fix your anger or whatever emotion is strong for you. It'll help you become aware of it, so you can then practice and do things in your life that change it. So the sitting is an opportunity to become aware of what's in our thoughts, what's in our mind. And when I say the sitting, I mean the meditation. It doesn't fix things. Whatever mess you got going on in your life right now, just because you sat quietly and relatively still for 20 minutes, I hate to break it to you, but that whole mess is still there waiting for you as soon as we're done, right? But hopefully you go into that with a little more clarity, a little calmer, a little gentler, a little more settled. And whatever mess we have in our lives, let's try not to make it worse. So with that, I'll pause. For me, I really just prefer to respond to meditation or to questions around meditation, Buddhist practice. And for those joining virtually, again, welcome. Feel free if you have any questions or thoughts, to put them in the chat box there. I'll do my best to respond. So we'll open up to questions around meditation, Buddhism, anything you're sitting with, and go from there. Yeah. What is Dharma? So at the very beginning, the question was, what is Dharma, for those who didn't hear? At the very beginning, when I do the offering and we join palms, we do what's called taking refuge. And we take refuge in what's called the triple gem, and that is the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Just to give a little context for those who maybe have not heard this briefly, starting with looking at refuge, right? The word refuge, safety, comfort, protection, home, whatever the word refuge means to you, it's important to explore what is refuge in your life. The first thing we take refuge in is the Buddha. Now, important to understand that we're not taking refuge in the Buddha himself. He died 2,500 years ago and he cannot help you. So you are on your own, my friends, right? We're not looking at the Buddha to save us or make us awakened or enlightened or anything like that. I mean, he was a great dude. He lived for 80 years and then he died. So we take refuge in what's called bodhicitta, or Buddha nature. And the idea that the Buddha, who was human just like we are, went through life just like we do, and he figured out a way to end his suffering just like we can. So I think that's very liberating. I find personally a lot of comfort in the fact that some other human could figure out how to end his suffering. As a practitioner, I don't wake up thinking like, okay, am I going to end my suffering today? Because trust me, it ain't happened, right? But I practice, can I suffer less today than I did yesterday? So taking refuge in the Buddha is bodhicitta, Buddha nature, that is within all of us. We all have the ability to awaken. And that's what taking refuge in the Buddha means. The second one is the Dharma, which is your question. And the Dharma often is looked at in two ways. One, the Dharma, they say, is ultimate reality. Just the true nature of reality. Not what the Buddha said reality is, because what the Buddha said reality is not reality. That's the Buddha's perception of reality. Now, of course, they say the Buddha was able to see ultimate reality, but as soon as you speak of anything, it's no longer ultimate reality. So, example, who here likes pizza? Who here likes broccoli? I just want to cover both ends of the spectrum, right? So whatever food you like to eat, all of a sudden you take a bite of that food, and then you start talking about it. The way you describe it is not what it tastes like. What your experience of eating that food, that's your reality. And then you talk about it, and you give a description of it. That's not reality. So that's our entire life. There is ultimate reality and then our perception of reality. So that's ultimate Dharma. In a more practical sense, the Dharma is often considered the teachings of the Buddha, very simply. So everything he taught for 45 years that was initially memorized and then eventually written down in what they call sutras. So the word sutra means thread. So it's like a thread of the teachings. All of those teachings, Four Noble Truths, Eightfold Path, Six Paramitas, Karma, Dependent Origination, all the stuff around loving kindness, compassion, joy, equanimity, all these teachings that you'll explore throughout Buddhism, that's what Dharma is, the teachings of the Buddha. And then the third one is the Sangha. We take refuge in the Sangha, and that's community. At the time of the Buddha, it was, the Buddha and the disciples. And, fast forward to today, often Sangha is kind of referred to as the group of people that you come together with to study, learn, and practice meditation and Buddhism. And when you take refuge and comfort and safety in the Dharma, what that means is in the Sangha, you also have to protect it. And so protecting the Sangha is very important. By protecting it, meaning keeping it safe, right? At the time of the Buddha, that's why the precepts were there. All the precepts were there, anywhere from 227 to 311 precepts were there, in essence, to keep the Sangha, keep the community safe. And that was the Buddha's responsibility, was to make sure that as they were bringing people together, that they could feel comfortable, safe, in harmony with each other as they explored and practiced. And if people in the Sangha were doing things that were divisive to the community, they were removed. So very often people have this kind of idealistic view of Buddhism. They're like, oh, we just love everyone. You can love someone and still kick them out. Most important is the safety of the space. And so I think in a present day, anything you do anything you can do to make sure that the space you create for people, the container, feels safe and comfortable is incredibly important, because if you don't create that safe space, then there's going to be a lot of challenges in trying to practice together. So hope that helps. Other questions?
A couple weeks ago, you started talking about Buddhism as a religion versus a philosophy.
Yes. The famous question, is it a religion or a philosophy? What have I shown up to? Because God forbid, no pun intended, you all would come to a religious thing. Many of you have already ruled that out of your life, and many of you have kept it in your life, which is really beautiful. So here's the thing about Buddhism. Is it a religion or philosophy? I will give you my unenlightened, ignorant perception of that question. It's both. Now, if you look at 2,500 years of history of Buddhist teachings, it has been practiced religiously with tremendous faith, devout faith, for 2,500 years, all over the world. If you go into a Thailand Thai temple, or a Lao temple, or a Cambodian temple, or Vietnamese, or Japanese, or Taiwanese temple, anywhere within 5 miles of here, and you go in there and say this isn't religion, this is philosophy, it's kind of like walking into a Catholic church and telling them it's not religion, right? It's kind of insulting, because, like I said, for 2,500 years, people have practiced Buddhism religiously, and our Western definition of religion is belief in a higher power or a God or something like that. And Buddhism doesn't have that, so often people say, well, it's not a religion. There's no gods. And in that regard, they're right, but that doesn't discount the fact that people practice Buddhism religiously. And I think that's really beautiful. Within that religious practice, there's a acceptance and appreciation and openness to all religions. There are 14 questions that the Buddha was asked that he didn't answer. And one of them was, should we believe in gods and goddesses? Now, at the time of the Buddha, he was Hindu, right? As I often say, when the Buddha was alive, there wasn't Buddhism. It was just some dude they called the Buddha. He was a Hindu guy. And he grew up believing in gods and goddesses. And so he was asked, should we believe in them? And his response in general was, I'm just a human. I cannot tell you to believe in gods and goddesses or not to believe in gods and goddesses. If you believe in them, you believe in them. If you don't, you don't. But his teachings were simply trying to get people to understand to be kind, compassionate, considerate human beings. That was all he wanted you to do. And if you had the belief in gods and goddesses, then wonderful. If you don't, that's your choice as well, right? A good friend of mine years ago said she was Catholic, and her Catholic faith was very important to her. And she said that when she began to learn Buddhism, it actually brought her closer to her Catholic faith. And I thought that was beautiful. She referred to it as a software upgrade, It made her a kinder, gentler person, which brought her closer to her belief in her religion. Now, the reason I said that at the beginning about, for those of you who, came here for whatever reason, very often in a modern day, you get people coming to Buddhism, coming out of some other religion. Not everybody. I mean, I know a lot of you in here are, you go to church, you have devout Christian, Catholic, Muslim, whatever faith it might be. And that's beautiful. But there's also a lot of people who come into this stuff and they feel so burned by religion. So they come here and they often say, I've heard this 1,000 times, I like Buddhism because it's not a religion. Now, what that typically means is you have a problem with religion. So you're going to take Buddhism and say, well, I'm going to use this because it's not religious. How you use it doesn't matter. What I like people to explore is what their hangups are. Not trying to put Buddhism in a box as a religion or a philosophy. Now, the other side of things, as far as Buddhism being a philosophy, he was just some dude. He taught how to live a kind, peaceful, gentle life. And so the way it's, for the most part, practiced by lay people, meaning non-monks, non-nuns, in the Western world is as a philosophy and a way of life. That is how most people I find in a place like this integrate Buddhist teachings into their life as a way of life. Ultimately, as the Dalai Lama once was asked if this country needed more Buddhists, he said the world has enough Buddhists. We don't need more. This country needs more people that are kind and compassionate. So however you integrate it into your life, however you view it, that's up to you. But I'd like to see it, because for me, I have so much respect and admiration for the actual history and the journey that Buddhism has taken through all these countries, because I think it's beautiful. And I don't think it's fair to kind of downplay it as just this, it's just a simple way of life. I mean, without the people who are deeply devoted and praying to Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, we wouldn't be sitting here right now. So I like to see it from both sides. Other questions? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I probably have a follow-up question.
Yeah.
I get a sense that there's like a distinction between secular Buddhism and religious Buddhism, but that could be totally misinformed.
Welcome to America, man. I mean, your question was, you understand there could be a difference between secular Buddhism and religious Buddhism. Secular Buddhism, again, this is just my ignorant opinion. Secular Buddhism is just a word defined for people who are afraid of religion, and they're not okay with the fact that Buddhism might actually be a religion. So they just call it secular Buddhism because they're hung up on religion. Buddhism is simply the teachings of the Buddha. Whatever you call it is meaningless. It's like the word mindfulness, you know? I mean, this country is so afraid of the word meditation, so we call it mindfulness. And that makes us feel better. Can't bring meditation into schools, but you can bring mindfulness. So again, whatever Western people need to do to satisfy their, attachments to their stuff, then God bless them. From the Jewish Buddhist sitting up here. So yeah, I'm not, as you can tell, I mean, very seriously, I'm not a fan of people, like, Buddhism is not secular. We just call it that, I think, because we're afraid of thinking that maybe there is a religious practice to it. And the reality is, maybe if we practiced Buddhist teachings devoutly, maybe we'd stop treating people like crap. So I'm just not a fan of the phrase secular Buddhism. There was a hand over here, I think, and then we'll go there. And somewhere, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, a monk. What is a monk?
A monk is such a hard question to answer in a way, because 2,500 years of cultures and Buddhist lineages, and all of them have different monastic practices and observances. Monastic, again, meaning a monk or nun, but in general, a monk or nun, nun is typically women, monk or men. Someone said the other day, very seriously, they didn't realize that when I referred to someone as a Buddhist nun, they didn't realize that there were Buddhist nuns. They thought nuns were only from other religions. I said, no, nuns in most traditions are women who are, in most Buddhist traditions, are women who ordain. But monks or nuns are people typically who've taken a much deeper level of commitment and faith on this Buddhist religious spiritual path, and have traditionally, again, each tradition is different, shaved their heads, put on robes, and left the lay secular life that we all live. So it's a level of renunciation within a Buddhist tradition. that they make to spend the rest of their lives as Buddhist monks or nuns. Yeah. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I just wanted to contribute to the previous conversation we had as far as religious versus philosophy. I see, for my own case, Buddhism is a practice. And I look at the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, and I take the Dalai Lama approach. He's like, look, if the Buddhist principles work for you, apply them to your life. If they don't work for you, leave them alone. And what I found is that that it's very effective. So the Eightfold Path, you don't even have to be perfect. Just the fact that you practice those steps, for my case, they really work. So to me, it's a practice.
Yeah, definitely. And that, again, it echoes to me, the original response of the Buddha, which was, it's up to you, but let's practice the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path. Let's be aware of greed, anger, ignorance. Let's practice generosity, compassion, wisdom. Let's work towards an awakening. Let's understand the way to get there, the Eightfold Path. To work on having correct views and thoughts and speech and action, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, concentration. He taught very, very directly on a path to minimize and ultimately end suffering. And you can do that if you're Christian, Catholic, Muslim, Jewish, Mormon, pagan, or whatever, or lack thereof. So yeah, thanks. Other thought? Yeah.
I think for me that, as he expressed as a practice and how I view it in my own path is because we're in a culture that we've been, conditioned that there's always an outcome, that I can't be doing something for nothing. And so for me, practicing means that there's no end point. And I'm such a straight, military-minded individual, because that's the way I was conditioned, right? That the task, you set a task and you complete it. And the lovely gift that this practice brings to my life is that there's no end point. That is a continuation, just like life and death.
Yeah.
And so it really feeds my soul to know that.
Yeah.
There's nowhere to go.
Definitely.
And no fruit to the labor. So.
Thank you. And that can be frustrating too, like you said, because we are so conditioned to think like, well, what am I going to get? I've been nice for 5 years. Wait, do I get something from this? No, you get to be nice for 5 years in a day. So yeah, it really is. We are, as you said, we are such a goal-oriented culture and group of whatever we are. And this is just the day-to-day practice. And that's hard because we want something from what we do. Thus, the Buddha taught craving and desire leads to suffering. If you want something from being nice, then you're missing the entire purpose of this practice. Be nice simply for the sake of being nice. Be kind, be forgiving, be understanding, simply for the sake of being that. Not so you can get something. Anyone ever forgiven someone and then waited for like what they're getting from it? Not this group, I'm sure, but yeah. There was a hand somewhere. Yeah.
Going back to monks, why do they shave their head? What is the purpose of their head?
Yeah. So the question was around why do monks shave their heads? This comes from the tradition of the Buddha, as all of these things do, although cultures may have obviously different variations of it. That when the Buddha left home, meaning when he was a prince at 29 years old and decided to leave home, because for those who don't know, he realized there's a whole world out there of suffering. He'd never seen old age, he'd never seen sickness, he'd never seen death, and then he saw an ascetic, a simple like a nun or a monk. And he said, I can't live with this life of wealth and riches when all the world out there is suffering. So 29 years old, he leaves home, and one of the first things he does, you'll often see it like kind of in a photo, like an image of it, right? He had beautiful long hair. This was a symbol of his royalty. as a prince. And he was giving up, renouncing. They consider, as I said earlier, monks and nuns, it's a renunciate path. And I just want to say now before I forget, my master always said, you don't have to shave your head and put on a robe, or the way he said it was, shaving your head and putting on a robe doesn't mean you're a monk or a nun. It's what's in your heart and mind. But in a practical sense, the teaching comes from when the Buddha left home, he symbolically took his long, beautiful, princely hair, cut it off, and shaved his head, to show that he was not attached to that symbol of being a prince anymore. He was done. And so the tradition came from that, where as somebody would ordain and become a monk and then a nun, they would shave their heads as a symbolic gesture of renouncing many of the worldly possessions and attachments. So, yeah.
You know, in the act of renouncing worldly attachments and relationships, that could cause pain to the folks left behind. Right?
Yes.
How do you reconcile that?
Not your job to reconcile that. That's what I hear you say. The question was, in that renouncing, right, leaving kind of this world of chasing pleasures that we're in, that could leave pain behind. And you said, how do you reconcile that? Right?
Mostly the human relationships. I imagine the Buddha had a wife and kids and family.
Oh yeah, he had a wife and a child. For those who didn't know, for those who like put the Buddha on this pedestal, the Buddha had a wife and a child and left them. Not so cool in today's world. Also not so cool then, right? I don't like defend his actions. There were reasons he did it, because I'm kind of moving away from this for a second, but let me just finish this thought. At that time, they all understood that there was going to be an endless cycle of rebirth. That's what they believed. And he wanted to understand why we suffer and how do we free ourselves from suffering. And he knew that there was only one way to free yourself from suffering. Now, if we know that what brings suffering, what is the first thing that brings suffering? When does it begin? When we are what? Born. We are born. We don't come out being like, yo, I'm here, right? We are screaming. And I'm not saying it's not a beautiful moment, I'm not trying to I've never been there. I mean, I was there on the that end, but I don't remember that, right? It's a beautiful moment. I'm not trying to I'm just saying, according to these teachings, the practice is that when we are born, we are guaranteed to suffer. It starts in the moment we're born, and we're going to experience suffering our whole lives. It doesn't mean all life sucks. But the cycle of rebirth said, once we're born, we're going to suffer. So what they wanted to understand was, how do we free ourselves from the cycle of rebirth? That's what he wanted to understand. The Buddha didn't teach so we could just all sit on a beach somewhere. He taught because he wanted us to end our suffering. And so his view was the same thing. He knew that his wife would be reborn and continue to suffer. He knew that his child would be reborn and continue to suffer. So he felt if he could figure out how to end that cycle, he could then share that with everyone, right? And again, I'm not trying to justify it. We all have our own thoughts on that. But then he came back after he awakened, and both wife and child became disciples and monks and nuns. Actually, the mother, his mother died 7 days after he was born, Siddhartha. And so his aunt was the one who raised him. But so back to your question is that, yes, when we leave situations, when we leave people, when we renounce or choose that path, it's going to leave some pain and suffering. So it's important with any decision we make around anything in life to understand what is our intention. And if our intention, right, and as I usually say when I share the story of the Buddha, leaving the wife and child, if you are new to Buddhism, this is not the green light for me to go home and be like, yo, honey, sorry, I'm leaving. I went to my Buddhist class and they said, I got to go on some spiritual journey for 6 years. So you have fun, I'll be back. No, right? And so we have to be very aware that our choices will have impacts. And if we choose to leave relationships or whatever it might be, there's going to be potential pain and suffering that is caused from that. But ultimately, we cannot control their reactions to the situation. We can only control what we do. So if our intention is coming from a place of compassion and kindness and a pure mind, a pure heart, that's kind of all we can do. So, yeah. There was one more, and then we'll wrap up. Yeah.
Who are these like golden figures?
Yeah, good question. So I'll finish with this. This one right here is, the name is Samantabhadra. And in Buddhism, we have what's called bodhisattvas. Bodhisattvas are enlightened beings, right? And so they're kind of like angels in a way, but they are enlightened beings that have vow, the bodhisattva vow, right? Again, talking about this cycle of rebirth, which is what for those who've never heard this before, in India at that time, for the most part, everybody believed in rebirth. It's not some weird thing. It's what they all believed in. If you went up to somebody in India 2,500 years ago and said you got one life and you're going to heaven or hell, they would have thought you were a little crazy. Fast forward to today, and most people in Western worlds think we're going to die and go to heaven or hell. And then this concept of rebirth comes up, and people are like, well, that's weird. So we're just living in a different time. The Buddha didn't invent rebirth or reincarnation or continuation of consciousness. It's what they all believed in, as millions of people still do today. So the idea of bodhisattvas was their vow was to be reborn life after life, to continue to help all beings from suffering. This one, Samantabhadra, represents great practice and great diligence. It comes from, in the bodhisattva practice, it's called the 6 paramitas. Paramitas loosely translates to perfection. It's not about being perfect, but it's the practice of generosity, morality, patience, diligence, concentration, and wisdom. So this represents diligence, great effort. You ever been lazy? Yeah. Stare at that dude more often, right? This is a reflection of your laziness. You're not the only one in here who's been lazy. You just asked the question, right? And the 6 tusks on the elephants represent the 6 paramitas. And elephants are really hardworking, really strong effort individuals. And so they often get symbolically tied to Samantabhadra for great effort, right? So that's great effort. This one is Manjushri, represents great wisdom. And you ever been in a cage with a crazy lion? No, doesn't sound fun, right? What's it like being in your mind? Same thing, right? So this, they show Manjushri, Bodhisattva of wisdom, sitting on a lion. But does that lion look dangerous? Like, maybe it depends, right? The correct answer would be no. So this is like a little playful, cute lion, and it represents taming our mind with wisdom. Is kind of like being in a cage with a crazy lion and taming the lion. Ironically enough, you're sitting under, that's Manjushri. That's the Tibetan version of this one over here, right? Same. And that's the sword. The sword they call the wisdom sword. So all the ignorance in our mind, that represents shattering the ignorance in our mind that causes suffering, right? So that's Manjushri for wisdom. And then the one in the middle here, her name is Kuan Yin. Kuan Yin hears all the suffering in the world and then pours out compassion to heal. The Dalai Lama, they say, is the literal rebirth of Kuan Yin. So after 10 years downtown, we moved here about 6.5 years ago, and we thought about what do we want to put as our center statue above our emaciated Buddha. And we felt what this temple, what the city, what this world needed was the feminine energy, the representation of Kuan Yin, and way more compassion. So she holds, or is seen pouring or holding very often, the base of compassion. So her name literally means hearer of the world's cries. So she hears all the suffering and then pours out compassion to heal. Bodhisattva Kuan Yin. Yeah, for sure. All right, so I'm going to close on that. We'll join palms. May the benefit of this practice be shared with all beings in all directions. May all beings be at peace. May all be free from suffering. May any merit gained be transferred to those who need it most. All right, a few quick announcements before you all head out. Thanks for being here. My name is Jeff. I'm a Dharma bum. We opened up this temple about 17 years ago to introduce Buddhist practice to those who show up. Those who lead are not monks, we're not nuns, we're not gurus, we're not masters, we're not teachers, we're not looking for students. We're just practitioners. We do our best to take our understanding of Buddhist teachings and put it into terms that hopefully make sense to those who show up. Every night, different practices going on, different unenlightened folks leading their approach and practice of Buddhist teachings. Every Thursday, 5 o'clock, we do a food redistribution program. I think one of the best things around here. So we prepare gourmet vegetarian meals, also known as peanut butter and jelly, and we put it on bread, and we feed people asleep on the street. So anytime you think your life sucks and you just lack all that you need, go feed people sleeping on the sidewalk, and it tends to put things into perspective. So we will also have our, I don't know, probably we missed it a few years with pandemic and stuff, but probably our 14th annual Thanksgiving Day food redistribution program. So we won't be at 5 o'clock. We'll be meeting here at 10 o'clock. We'll be making lots of peanut butter and jelly. We'll be passing out some hats and some socks and some other stuff. It's all on the website right now. But Thursday, 10 a.m. If you want to come, we always do it early on Thanksgiving, so that way at 10 we're here till about 11:30 or so, and then we head downtown. And then you're pretty much done by 1 o'clock. So whatever your Thanksgiving plans may be the rest of the day, you still have plenty of time to go to that. So if you want to come Thursday morning and hang out with a bunch of people and make some sandwiches, you're welcome. It'll be a grand old time. So other than that, thanks for being here. If you can give me a minute, I have to run out real quick and run downstairs. So if you need me, I'll be there. But thank you all. Wish you well. Oh, and always, there's a list in the bathroom if you want to stick around and clean or help.